Hello, and welcome to this webinar recording of Day-Neutral Strawberry Production Systems. This is not a live recording. This webinar took place on March 11th, 2021 at 1 p.m. Our speakers for this webinar were Steve Poppe, Annie Klodd, and Kate Fessler from University of Minnesota. The recording for this live webinar started about 2 minutes into the presentation on slide 6, and so we're going to pick up with Steve talking about how to establish a day-neutral system in low tunnels.
Product. The millimeters are very thin, a thin plastic, but the black is on the underside and the white is on the top. Okay, and what that does, the black, it inhibits light from penetrating the plastic, so you don't have the weeds. Okay, and the white, it's amazing how this it reflects light back onto the plants. Okay, very beneficial in whether in a low tunnel system or a non-low tunnel system, and also keeps the plants a little cooler underneath this particular low tunnel. Of course, you can get very warm with pulling these sides down, but we've taken measurements and whatever else with temperatures and whatnot, and over the entire season, it actually is not that whole lot warmer underneath the system because of the white on black plastic. Okay. Low tunnel construction and planting. You do need some machinery for this system. This is a bed shaper fastened to a 3-point hitch on a tractor. It is really beneficial that you have a tractor with front wheel assist. You're really throwing up a lot of soil, and you want to keep these rows straight and uniform and whatnot. But this type of bed shaper is used to put down after you've tilled it to a very fine tilth. That's important. You can create these raised beds. We have been using beds that are about 6 inches high. That's what we've stayed with for the last number of years. Then you put this white on black plastic down. I'll show you a little bit about that, which is 4 foot wide, 1 mil thick. Drip tape is part of the system too. And dormant day neutral strawberries are part of this. It's very important. I'm really fussy when we shape these beds. I got a carpenter's level out and a tape measure. I want them exactly level as they can be, and I want them 6 inches off the ground. And that's very important. You do all this type of mechanical beforehand, you'll save yourself a lot of big headaches if you do it right. Otherwise, the system is, once you get it all set and whatnot and get it calibrated and get it all set, you can do acres and acres, but there's a lot of adjustment up front. This is a plastic mulch machine. As you can see, the things, the white things up towards the top right here is a drip tape, which automatically goes through these tubes and goes underneath this white on black plastic. There are 2 drip tape that go underneath the white on black plastic, and they're just very close to the strawberry plants. In the other slide here, off to your right, with the orange gloves you'll see right here, this particular wheel makes a little dent or indentation in the white on black plastic, and that tells you where to plant your dormant strawberry transplants. Again, a lot of adjustment. I mean, I've done this for years. A lot of adjustment, and you'll almost tear your hair out before you get it right. But once you get it right, it's very important. Can't stress that enough. Here just shows another picture of the plastic mulch machine putting down the white on black plastic. These coulters off to the side, they throw black dirt back over the edges. Very important that you get that on uniformly so the plastic doesn't blow on you. And again, that dry white wheel puncher that's on the back. Planting. There actually is no machine for planting these dormant transplants. The normal spacing that we've used for years and years is 14 inches between rows and 12 inches between plants that are staggered in the row. What we use is just a standard 1 inch by 12 inch wooden plant stake, and we kind of roll up the roots on these dormant transplants, and we use the blunt end of that planting stake, and we insert it into the ground. You've worked up this soil to a very fine tilth. It goes in the ground very easy. And maybe many of you know, the soil line has to be, well, you got about a 1/4 inch play with where you want this plant in the soil. And always press the roots right at the end. Don't press them into the soil up in this midway area of the dormant roots, or else what you'll create is this J root, and your plants will eventually die. Make sure you're right on the end of the transplant when you insert it into the white on black plastic soil. Here's a little bit more of the construction. As you can see, these hoops that are over the top of the rows. These strawberries were just transplanted. You can see those little guys in there. These hoops will show you in a slide or two. The plastic will be put over the top of those. They are put in every 5 foot. There's this rubber pipe on the end right here that's put at about a 45-degree angle where the plastic comes down. And this pipe, I'll show you that in a bit, that anchors the plastic on either end. And of course, we're using landscape fabric on some of these initial trials to help us with our weed control.
All right, we've got a couple of questions. Thanks, Steve.
Yes.
The first is, are the plastic machines rentable anywhere?
I'm not sure on that. We've always promoted if a farmer group would buy these together, they could use them because you just use them over a very short period of time. But I don't currently know of anybody that will rent them. Ag Resources is where our machine comes from. Dave Berkey is in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. He's a distributor for these machines. You could ask him. That would be my best guess on that.
Okay, the next one is, where do we get our planting stock and whether they're organic?
Yes, there are not a lot of locations left in the United States that sell dormant strawberry transplants of day neutrals, but there are a few of them that are very reliable. Norse Farms out of the southeastern part of the United States is very reliable, grows great day neutral plants. Indiana Berry out of Indiana. And again, the Dave Berkey, who is with Ag Resources out of Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, he is a broker for strawberry plants. You can communicate with him and he can get you these varieties. But there are other sources too, but those are the main ones that we have worked with and have been very reliable.
And then one last one for the moment. We'll get to a question about SWD flies in a second. Is whether you use 1 drip line per raised bed or 2?
We normally use 2. Again, there are 2 drip lines in here just to make sure you have adequate moisture. They are placed just on either side on the, and we've learned this too. At first, we would have the drip tape on the outside of those rows. Let me go back just a little bit, if maybe you can see. Okay, I'll use my pointer here. At first, we put it on the outside of the row, okay? Drip tape, when it gets cold, from cold water or when it gets warm, it moves. It's just magic. It moves. And so it tends to hang off to the side, okay? It moves off to the side. So now over the last number of years, we put that drip tape, 1 on either inside of those 2 rows of strawberries there. And they stay. They can't roll off that side of that 6-inch raised bed. This shows another picture here of some staking material that you use. You put the stake in on every other hoop, every 10 feet to hold them in the ground. Just showing part of this was at a Farmer Cooperators, and just showing some of the mechanical part of constructing the low tunnel. Here we are putting the low tunnel plastic or the hoop over the top of the rows. Again, you see these galvanized pieces of frame that go over the top. We're just have a pipe and we're rolling out this by hand. This shows you a good picture of this Dubois plastic. It has perforated holes on the side, okay? So in the spring and in the fall, you bring that plastic down and it does have some ventilation so it can vent and not get extremely warm. On this slide right here to my right, you can see where we've tied those pipes that were placed in the ground. We just tie these off at the end. And when our rows have normally been 100 foot long, but when you pull this, you want to pull it extremely tight and it will stretch so it doesn't move on you. But pull it down and tie it in a big knot on the end, and that usually holds it for the rest of the growing season. Then the next step is with the elastic straps. As you can see here, they're putting them over the top. Every one of those hoops, 5 foot, these elastic straps go over to hold that plastic in place. and it just hooks down here in this little hook that's part of that system down there. Works great for those elastic straps to hold the system in place so it doesn't blow away. The one thing that we, over the last couple of years, we've learned with our high pH soils, okay, you keep these mini greenhouses over the top, and with our high pH soils, you're just using irrigation water, and our salt levels tend to be a little high. And we suddenly have found at about in September or so, we start killing a few plants. What we've done to help us with that is we leach when we have a forecasted rain in the forecast, we bring these low tunnels all the way down, okay? Just slide them off to the side, and we let a normal rainfall leach these rows of these plants that are in these small little holes. But that has been amazing. Since we've been doing that, we have no damage, no toxic salt issue, because we were able to leach those salts off those plants. That has worked very well.
All right, Valerie would like to know, Steve, what month we are planting in.
Okay, normally you get these in the ground as early as you can. Late April, early May would be a preferred time. As soon as you can work the soil, you can put these plants in the ground.
Okay, great. Anonymous asker would like to know what the advantages are of California day neutral strawberries over the June bearing and perennial varieties.
Well, I'll get into that just a little bit later of the productivity of these day neutrals, but June bears are great. I've been a June bear grower, pick your own, I was 25 years on the side. I've been doing research with Jim Ruby on June bearing variety trials. They're great, you know, they have a short window of season, and you're always under the gun to get them picked. And a lot of those operations are pick your own, but here you have a system that is really coming on in a very non-traditional time in the upper Midwest. We start picking about late July and you go into early October. I'll show you some other pictures of these individual fruits. It's a new market for you. And you can, again, if you want to be a June bearer and a day neutral grower, well, you're growing strawberries all year long, but there's really an advantage to this system where you can bring strawberries into season during a very non-traditional time.
Excellent. And we have one last question about plastic before we get into expenses. Star would like to know whether the plastic is secured at the bottom and along the sides of the beds as well.
And they're referring, Kate, to the white on black plastic?
I believe so, although.
Well, white on black plastic is held in place with soil. I showed you a picture of that machine that throws the coulters on the plastic mulch machine, throw soil back along the side to hold the plastic in place.
Okay, she would like to know about the greenhouse plastic as well.
Okay, the plastic that's over the hoop, it holds itself in place with those elastic straps that I showed you, and then tying it off on the end.
Okay, perfect. And Craig would like to know how many years you can plant in this system without having to move it.
Again, this is an annual system. We have always treated it that way. Again, we're trying to be somewhat organic with our system, where we're removing the plastic every year and removing the plants. Again, they do not overwinter well in our climate in the upper Midwest. They need to be removed and new plants need to be put in each year. But you can replant into and I'll get into that a little bit later with our living mulch system too, that might help with replanting back into the same area.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Yep. So here's some expenses. Okay. So these expenses are from a number of years ago, but it should give you a real close idea of what it costs for this system. We put everything in here that we could think of, from fertilizers to pesticides to the system, the plastic, the tractor fuel, all those variable and fixed costs. Okay. So we're going to talk 100-foot row, and that's what we've normally worked on in our trial systems. So remember that figure, $213.54. That's what it costs. Okay. Now we'll get into projected profit. So if you have an average total yield, this is in 2015 data, an average total yield per plant of, over 3/4 of a pound, 0.8 of a pound. So of course, you're going to have some loss. There's 15% loss that we figured on, some bad fruit, or from whatever issue. So we're going to lose some of that. And so our average marketable yield per 100-foot row is going to be 141.2 pounds. Average selling price per pound, we just use $5. You can charge more than that. Some of our growers are charging $8 a pound for this, but we'll just use an average price of $5 a pound. Gross profit per 100-foot row is $706 here. So then we'll throw in, it takes 10 hours of labor to pick a 100-foot row. We figured at $9.50 an hour. We've kept track of, the economics of this. That's over a couple years, average of 10 hours of labor to pick a 100-foot row. So we're minus $95 there. Total cost, variable and fixed, you remember from that last slide, was $213.54. So we have a net profit per 100-foot row of close to $400. In 1 acre, there are just a little over 72 100-foot rows. The net profit in this system is almost close to $29,000. That's some very nice change right there. I'll show you some of these yields. I mean, when I talk about 0.8 of a pound, if you can get close to a pound, and we've had yields as close to 2 pounds per plant, this is really, you're talking some serious change here. So there is potential to make some pretty good money with this system.
All right. Craig would like to know whether that's 10 hours per year per season.
Correct, it is. Okay, Annie, I'll stop sharing here so you can talk about yours.
Okay. And I don't have too many slides here. Steve's going to jump back in just a few minutes because he's the real expert on this topic. But I just wanted to mention that in addition to the low tunnel system, there are growers not using the low tunnel system. In Minnesota, I know at least one organic berry farmer who is growing his day neutral strawberries in caterpillar tunnels. He had tried doing the low tunnels 1 year, but for his personal preferences, he decided to try it in a caterpillar tunnel. And then after 1 year of using caterpillar tunnels, he decided that was the better system for him. And so he has expanded that since then and actually built additional caterpillar tunnels. And so I just wanted to say that this is another option if for whatever reason the low tunnels aren't for you. And so as you can see, he's still using, the same plastic row. So he is still using the bed shaper and the plastic layer. The only difference is basically how the rows are covered. And at Little Hill Berry Farm, they're experimenting with a few different row covers, or ground covers. They're using straw, landscape fabric, white plastic, black plastic, and cardboard. Now, I just want to say up front, we do not recommend using straw for day neutral strawberries because Andy Petrin's research showed that the yields are consistently much lower when straw is used as opposed to white on black plastic. So I think Aaron also told me that he has had good success. He's happy with the landscape fabric that he's used, but the issue with landscape fabric is you're poking holes in it and then you would be trying to reuse it every year. So I think that could get logistically difficult, but I wanted to just mention these options to you so you can make your own decisions. But still at this point, our main recommendation is to use the white on black plastic. And I wanted to compare the cost of caterpillar tunnels to low tunnels. As Steve mentioned in the beginning, low tunnels are a lower cost system than growing day neutral strawberries in a high tunnel. So I wanted to compare caterpillar tunnels as well. So the cost of one caterpillar tunnel that is 100 feet long is between $1,500 to $2,000, according to my source down here at farmersfriend.com. Not an endorsement, just an example of a place you can go to order caterpillar tunnels and see their prices. So that's the cost for one tunnel, which can hold 3 100-foot rows of berries. So 300 feet of berries total. And if we compare those costs of a caterpillar tunnel with the low tunnels, and here the costs I'm comparing are just basically the tunnel structures. So, the plastic that you use on the ground, the plants, the fertilizer, the irrigation tape,
all of that is going to be the same. So the cost comparison I'm doing here is just the Caterpillar tunnel kit, the hoops and the plastic, with the low tunnel hoops and the greenhouse plastic over the hoops. And so with a Caterpillar tunnel, 1,500, 2,500 for a tunnel that can hold 300 feet of row. So that's 100 feet rows. If you compare that with the low tunnel plastic and hoops, I calculated this based on Steve's data that he just showed, but for 300 feet. And so what I have is plastic over the hoops is going to be $33, the hoops $237, and the anchors $159. And so that comes out to $429 to install the same length of row as for if you were growing in a Caterpillar tunnel. Now, theoretically, the materials you're using for the Caterpillar tunnel are going to be semi-permanent, so you're not going to be needing to replace everything every year. The hoops for a low tunnel and the anchors are also permanent, but you would need to be replacing the plastic every year. So that is a cost comparison that I wanted to show. And this is what day neutral strawberries can look like growing in a high tunnel. And as Steve mentioned, it just is the reason why not everybody wants to do it in a high tunnel is it just seems like a lot of vertical space that you're using for such a small crop. However, I know that there are a lot of growers who have high tunnels, and you might be considering, what should I plant in your high tunnel? So day neutrals are an option that have a pretty high return. So this is Untied's vegetable farm. This is one of their tunnels of day neutral strawberries, and that's just an up close view. This is the only photo I have of high tunnel day neutral strawberries. I'm not sure why, because I know multiple farmers doing that in Minnesota. But in conclusion, economically, as far as the materials, the low tunnel system is more economical to install if you're starting from scratch.
All right, Annie, we have two quick questions and a comment. The comment is from Micah saying Aaron, who I believe was the one using the landscape plastic, apparently he mentioned he had some trouble with heat with the black plastic.
Mm-hmm.
Then the questions we have, the first is, how are we defining Caterpillar tunnel versus high tunnel?
So a Caterpillar tunnel is, it's a lot smaller, it's narrower, and it's typically shorter than a high tunnel. So if you go, for instance, just to this website here, farmersfriend.com, you'll see a variety of different Caterpillar tunnel models there. Versus a high tunnel, this is a Haygrove high tunnel. So you can see it's a lot taller. It's typically a lot wider as well.
Okay. Matt has a good follow-up question. Whether it's easier to harvest in a Caterpillar tunnel or high tunnel versus the low tunnel.
So I can say what I'm sure that I think that Aaron would be comfortable with me saying what he said about that, which is for the Caterpillar tunnel, you can stand over the row and straddle the row as you're harvesting. Versus I'll let Steve talk about how to harvest with the low tunnels. But you're not really able to straddle the row there, are you, Steve?
No, you're not. I mean, with the low tunnel system, you're on your knees, just like with June bears, and you have to reach inside this tunnel and pick the strawberries. So it is somewhat cumbersome, but it is still achievable.
Yeah.
Okay. Someone else.
Oh, go ahead, Kate. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that someone else was wondering about whether pollination can become an issue with low tunnels and Caterpillar tunnels.
Do you want to take that one, Steve?
Yes, we still, during the bigger part of the growing season, our low tunnels are up. We normally bring them up probably about 16 to 20 inches off the ground, and we're always seeing bees in there. And again, the perforated sides on the low tunnel allows for, again, great ventilation, but it lets in some of those beneficial insects too.
Okay, perfect. And Lois is wondering whether if the low tunnel plastic is replaced every year, what the impact is of all of that plastic being trashed.
Yes, the low tunnel plastic, the hoop, does need to be discarded at the end of each season. It won't last more than one season. It's fairly inexpensive, but again, I see your point from the environmental standpoint and whatnot, it has to be thrown away.
All right, thank you so much, everyone.
And then one system we're not going to talk about today because Kate and I are giving a presentation on this in the fall is the tabletop systems for day neutral strawberries. And this is what Kate has been doing her research on. And so we are doing a webinar on this October 21st at 1 p.m. and the link is there. All right. So here's just some comparisons. There are probably other things I could have included on this slide, but these are some things that came to mind to me if you're trying to select a system. So as far as cost, low tunnels are going to be a lower installation cost compared to the others, with high tunnels obviously being the highest cost by far. With low tunnels, the plastic lasts for 1 year, but the hoops are permanent. With Caterpillar tunnels and high tunnels, the materials are permanent unless they get damaged and they have to be replaced. Caterpillar tunnels are also movable, so you can rotate your crops every year as you can with low tunnels. Let's see, with low tunnels, you can't stand over the row to harvest. With Caterpillar tunnels and high tunnels, you can. All three systems though, and this is really important in terms of climate change and thinking about how we're going to remain resilient with climate change. If we're getting more rainfall events, that leads to disease. And so all three of these systems are considered protected culture. And so they're going to be keeping out rainfall from falling directly on the plants and therefore reducing disease incidents that is a result of rainfall. So when we're looking into the future and thinking about the prediction of more storms, more rainfall, this could be a good thing.
We have a great question that goes along with disease. Star would like to know whether any of these tunnel systems are preferred for excluding SWD flies.
Okay. Well, none of them are going to completely exclude SWD. If you wanted to completely exclude it, you would need to use exclusion netting, which is something that can be installed either on Caterpillar tunnels or high tunnels. I don't know of instances where it has been installed on low tunnels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
we normally spider-wing Drosophila, we have not used exclusion netting. It would be probably rather difficult to use it on a low tunnel.
Mm-hmm. Steve, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can go to your next slide.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and hopefully these are a couple questions we can answer while we're transitioning. Valerie would like to know how long the low tunnels are covering the strawberries and whether at any point it gets too hot for them.
And I know Steve's trying to load his presentation right now. I think he'll get to that question once he gets his slides loaded here.
Okay, sounds good to me. Here's one for you though, Annie. Matt says exclusion netting would require pollinators though, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Correct. So you have to put the bees inside the exclusion netting. And so if you're going to try that approach on a Caterpillar tunnel or a high tunnel, you would need to have hives in each individual one. There is one farmer in Minnesota who's using exclusion netting over his day neutral strawberries. He's not growing them in hoops or high tunnels. He's growing them just under an exclusion structure. I think his field that he has covered is about 1/4 of an acre, and it's just like a big rectangular netted exclusion.
Okay, perfect.
I have another question about following up what you just said. Is it possible to grow these cultivars, these day neutral cultivars, without any tunnels?
Oh,
and
yeah.
How would those yields compare to the tunnels? If you didn't want to invest in any of these structures, but you still wanted to grow day neutral strawberries, would you be able to grow them without any cover?
Yes. Covers are not an absolute requirement for this system. The covers will extend your season later into the fall because they keep it warmer in there. And they also have the advantage of keeping out rain and therefore reducing disease and increasing the quality of the berries. But I do know farmers who are growing them just in open field without any covering. I don't know off the top of my head how the yields compare. I feel like Steve and we've emailed about that, haven't we? Do you remember?
And I've got an upcoming slide to show the difference in yields between, low tunnel and no low tunnel.
Thanks.
Okay. Are you okay, Steve, to answer real quick the question about how long the low tunnels are covering the strawberries and whether it gets too hot for them at any point?
Yes, I mean, our plots have normally been 100 foot long, You could probably stretch it out to probably 150 foot long. It's rather difficult, with that much plastic, to pull it tight. And so I would say 150 at the max. And then it, again, during the heat of the summer, we have the sides up, for good ventilation. These last couple of years now, we've lowered the side on the east side. We've kept it down the entire season and left the west side up. And that has worked quite well. You offer that protection to keep it nice and warm in the east side, where the sun comes up on the east side, offering some heat in the early mornings, but yet it still has some ventilation. Of course, they'll get up, 80, 85, 90 at sometimes, but overall, it doesn't get that hot because that white on black plastic actually helps cool the plants. Okay, which cultivar should we grow? Okay, I'll talk a little bit about that. These are varieties that have been around for a while. Portola, in most of our trials, has the highest yields, probably the lowest sweetness, but large fruit, very heavy yielder. Albion is kind of the standard throughout the whole upper Midwest, the northeastern part of the United States, and into the southeast and throughout California. Albion is very popular. Good sweetness, average yields, but still a great variety. Monterey is another variety that we've trialed, large fruit, above average yields. And Seascape, an old variety, been around, probably one of the first day neutrals a number of years ago. Good all-around performance in dry conditions, but it is susceptible to some fungal infections. And normally Seascape, in some of our trials, has had about half the yield of some of these other varieties. What kind of yields can I expect? So for every cultivar, harvest normally begins in about mid to late July. Earlier, if you don't remove the flowers. Andy, he doesn't remove any flowers, so his comes into productivity much earlier. I tend to, as a grower, as a researcher, we remove the flowers until about July 1st, and about 3 weeks later we get fruit. I just like for a nice, healthy, strong root system in the plants before we start getting into productivity. Yields are normally highest in mid-August. They taper down until late October. And with day neutrals, you want the energy to go into the crown of the plant, okay? There are going to be runners. You need to remove runners and cut them. We just use a scissors, and we go up and down the rows and remove those runners about 3 times during the growing season. So you don't encourage that vegetative growth. You want that energy to go into the crowns to produce the fruit. I know this is rather small. It shows some of our yields. These are from some years ago, 2013, 2014, when we had this same project at St. Paul and at Morris. Here you can see the difference in low tunnels and no low tunnels. And if we go to St. Paul, you're looking at some of the size or the number of pounds of fruit per plant. Here you see the 4 varieties we were working with in low tunnels and no low tunnels. I mean, they're comparable, okay? But when you get up around 1 to 1.5 pounds per plant, you're doing quite well. If we go over here to the other side in Morris, in 2013, here's Portola. Like I say, very heavy yields, 2.1 pounds per plant. We had 38,000 pounds as an average yield. It was just off the charts, unbelievable fruit. And here's the no low tunnels in Morris as compared to low tunnels. Again, there are some differences at times, as you can see with some of these various yields you might look at. Here's the combined low tunnel yields that we've had over this project. But as of the last 7 years, average is probably about close to 17,000 pounds over all these varieties that we've trialed over the last 7 years or so. Here's a new promising day neutral variety called Cabrillo. We've been growing this for about 3 years. As you can see, they are monsters. but they continued a strong harvest until October 9th in 2019. Very excellent uniform size, good flavor, and really held up well under refrigerated storage. We were impressed with that. In a non-replicated trial, it had the largest individual fruit, 2018, 2019, 16 to almost 20 grams per individual fruit. I've been growing strawberries and trialing strawberries for 40 plus years. If you can get into 12 to 15 grams per individual fruit, you're doing well. Here's something that's close between 16 and 20. So they are good size and they have been very reliable for us.
Steve?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a couple of questions. The most recently relevant one is, what's your favorite cultivar for flavor?
I would say Albion would be pretty much the best day neutral strawberry for flavor.
I will actually also second that. We're growing Albion and Cabrillo this year, and the Albion are really sweet.
Yes.
The other question is whether there is an overall reduction in production or increased plant death if you don't prune the first flowers.
No, there is some research that's come out of Cornell that talks about not removing flowers, at all. And the productivity was still pretty good. I mean, you might do a search for that. I been years ago since I looked at that data, but Andy, who is a commercial grower, does not remove his flowers at all. And he just comes into productivity much earlier and has great fruit.
Okay, perfect. And the final one is, oops, sorry, there's a couple that are coming in, but what temperature, what time of year is the best time to start opening the tunnels, just in terms of what is too hot for day neutral plants?
Well, from old school, anything over 85 degrees is somewhat detrimental for strawberries when they are in productivity. Okay, so you want to try and avoid that. They'll actually go backwards somewhat. So, but when they're not in productivity, I mean, you can go warmer than that. But again, under these low tunnels systems, we haven't had a real issue with excessive heat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And we have a couple questions that we will save until a little farther down to let you keep going on your slide, Steve. Thank you so much.
You bet. And here's with that last study, we looked at Cabrillo and Albion, and just looking at these figures right here, Cabrillo had, close to 18,000 pounds and Albion was, close to 11,000 pounds in that trial in 2019. Okay, now we're going to get into, we've done some work with living mulches. I know a lot of you, some of your questions concerned about the use of plastic, and we hear that concern, and we're looking at that. And we continually look at this. So we looked out to make our system more sustainable by demonstrating a between row living mulch. So living mulches can suppress early season weeds without competing with strawberry plants. And we know that some of these living mulches can contribute to soil health. We looked at some of these that we thought would be great living mulches in between the strawberry rows. It was Camelina, Canola, and Rye. And we compared them to the landscape fabric. And I'll go into a little bit more detail with those in a few minutes. These are considered biennial species in the spring. Plants will remain, this was our hypothesis, these plants will remain in their low stature stage throughout the season because they are considered biennials and they will not bloom. Okay, that was our thinking before we started this study. Our hope was at the end of the season, when the living mulches are tilled under, they will add valuable organic matter to the soil. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So in 2019, and we're going to continue the study this year with some other types of living mulches. We established 2 experimental trials working with a farmer cooperator and another trial at our West Central Research and Outreach Center. We established annual strawberries rows, just like I've been explaining the whole system with the low tunnel day neutral system with Albion and Cabrillo. And then we had 4 in-between row treatments: winter Camelina, winter Canola, winter Rye, and the landscape fabric as those 4 treatments. Plots were maintained organically. So we took a soil test at the beginning of the season and the end of the growing season. I'll share a little bit about the results of that. Well, both locations had very different outcomes in terms of how well the living mulch germinated. At our farmer cooperator site, germination was poor, and so the mulches never became fully established and therefore did not offer any weed control. If many of you are growers and you remember 2019, oh my gosh, did we have rain, and a lot of rain. And our farmer cooperator, Andy, who's located south of the Twin Cities areas, just got, I mean, those 3, 4, 5-inch rains were detrimental. So it was unfortunate that it just kind of, too much moisture was really hard on these living mulches. But at our site, germination established was good. I'll show you some of those pictures. Weather around the time of seeding is critical for establishment with these very fine seeded living mulches. Okay, 3 different living mulch crops in fabric at the West Central Research Knowledge Center. These were, replicated 4 times. So we planted them by hand in between the rows in the early summer after the strawberry rows had been planted. Just shows you some of the pictures from during the middle of the growing season. One of our living mulches was winter rye. It had good germination established at the West Central Research Knowledge Center. As a grass, this winter rye doesn't have a rosette stage like broadleaf plants, but it does stay relatively short. It is a biennial, as I talked about before, and requires a period of cold temperatures before flowering. It grows quickly, meaning it would likely choke out most of the weeds. Its height is easily managed, and it makes a good surface for walking. And the seed is readily available and fairly inexpensive with winter rye. Winter Camelina. This is a unique crop, part of another weed scientist, Dr. Frank Frisella, who we worked with for years at the USDA Soils Lab in Morris. They were looking at various oil seed crops, and they were also looking at, from a pollinator standpoint too. Pollinators love this crop, but it's typically planted in the fall. It overwinters, and then it lies dormant in the soil over the winter, and it grows and flowers the next year. So it's a winter annual, and it shows promise as a soybean cover crop and a food source for pollinators, as I mentioned. The oil seed crop also has some other benefits. It improves water quality by holding back nitrate leaching, which usually happens in the spring in Minnesota. And so with this information, we believe that over the summer, Camelina would remain in the rosette stage if planted in the spring. That was our thought, and we moved forward with that. So winter Camelina weed suppression was successful the first month while it remained in a rosette, but however, likely due to the cool, wet June, it started to flower, which was unlikely for this plant. So the rosette's leaves started to deteriorate, allowing weed seeds to germinate. The end of August, the plants had very little biomass left, and overall, Camelina was unsuccessful at controlling weeds throughout the growing season. The winter canola.
Steve?
Yes.
Sorry, for the winter rye, I know you said you plant the Camelina in the fall. Is the winter rye planted in early summer?
It is in the spring. It is planted. Yeah, and winter rye would normally be planted in the fall as an agronomic crop, but we planted it in the spring. So it would not, and it didn't flower, being planted in the spring.
Thank you so much.
Yep. So here's the winter canola. We used a variety. It's just been introduced that is a new variety for some of Frank Frisella's work with pollinators and such, but it's called Torrington Winter Canola. It was seeded at about 10 pounds per acre. It had excellent germination and establishment, grew quickly into large rosettes, which led to excellent weed control. But the rosettes grew so large that they had to be mowed back 4 times during the growing season. So this made the canola a relatively high maintenance mulch compared to the others, but it provided excellent weed control over the entire growing season. The landscape fabric, we tried that as one of our treatments using these other 3 living mulches and comparing it to the fabric. And here are some of the yields. This table below shows the statistics separated by mulch treatment. And overall, the fruit produced with the landscape fabric walkways was higher than any other treatment. As you can see right here, we were close to 17,000 pounds with the fabric over all these replicated trials. And Canola was the lowest, next to Camelina came in, and then the rye was, 15,000. So the rye wasn't that much worse than the fabric, but overall the fabric was the better treatment. So Andy, who is a scientist and a farmer, say we need more data before making a regional recommendation on walkway over cover crops for annual strawberry production. What he says is that for his farm, I don't think that the cover crops have potential for weed control. I know he will not be using them in the future. He will be switching exclusively to landscape fabric in the rows. And why is that? Because the effectiveness of the fabric at weed suppression, it compared to anything else, it was good. Reduced labor involved with the fabric. And this is a big one. He calculated that an acre of fabric in the walkway results in a savings of approximately 150 labor hours per season. There's no mowing, there's no using a weed whacker, etc. That is, you can use that time for other important practices. So, and also uses fabric for multiple years. I should share a few things what added to the soil of these three living mulches. The fabric treatment actually depletes the soil of soil nutrients. That's what we found out in our soil test. And so those nutrients will be not available for next year's strawberry crop. So in other words, you'll need more commercial fertilizer to achieve peak production with strawberries using the fabric. The rye treatment showed similar results compared to the fabric. So not a great living mulch crop for use in strawberries. Camelina also showed the decrease in soil nitrates could be a problematic for the next year's strawberry crop. And finally, the canola treatment showed an increase in many different, in carbon, nitrates and ammonium and other beneficial things that are in the soil. And these results indicate that this living mulch does indeed create a more nutrient-rich soil with just one growing season. And then by increasing the nitrogen levels, the next strawberry crop should benefit from this and possibly require very little, if any, fertilizer the next season with using the canola treatment. So that's some of the results from our soil test looking at these living mulches. And finally, thank you to all the funding that has helped us over the years: North American Strawberry Growers Association, Minnesota Department of Ag, Minnesota Specialty Crop Block Grant Program, Minnesota Department of Ag Sustainable Agricultural Demonstration Grants, and also the Minnesota Agriculture Experiment Station. And with that, here's all of our websites and email addresses. If you have other further questions later on, you can certainly get a hold of us and we can help you determine if this type of system would be great for you as a farmer. That's what I have.
Thanks,
Kate and Annie.
I was going to put up the evaluation poll, but it seems that it's not working for some reason. So for everybody who attended, I'm going to send out like 2 or 3 quick evaluation questions. If you could please fill those out, it would really help us. We evaluated last year's evaluation results in order to determine to keep doing this series this year. So we do use those. Our next webinar is April 8th at 1 p.m. And that's going to be on organic pest management for June bearing strawberries. So I included the link there in the chat. And now we have more time for Q&A.
Okay, so the first question that we were holding back until the end was from Craig, and it was asking about whether it's possible to get more pounds per plant than the numbers that we discussed earlier, Steve.
Well, we've showed, that, the strawberries in this system are not heavy, users of fertilizers. They do use, a little bit of nitrogen. We do feed our plants with a water-soluble organic fertilizer about every other watering, which helps to maintain that fertility level. But for the most part, I mean, we've always, in those 7 or so years, anywhere between 3/4 of a pound and 2 pounds. If you get anywhere between a pound and a pound and a half, like I mentioned earlier, that's some very decent yields.
Okay, the next question we have is from Matt. He's asking, what about organic mulch in the paths, but not on the beds, e.g. ramial, wood chips, or straw or leaves?
Well, as Annie mentioned before, and Andy Petron, looking at this from a research standpoint at St. Paul campus years ago, used the straw mulch in between the rows. And we had pretty poor yields with using that. Again, with straw mulch, you're going to bring in lots of weeds. But there are other, you mentioned the wood chips. Wood chips are, I would not recommend those if you're going to plant strawberries back into those areas, because it does rob the soil of nitrogen, and it does take a while to break down. So our next cover or living mulch we're going to be using this year is called crimson clover. We tried it a little bit last year. Crimson clover does flower, and it was amazing. There is this insect called the tarnished plant bug, which is found in over 400 different types of plants, and tarnished plant bug, you inevitably will have to spray your strawberries for that particular insect. It is always there. And we found with crimson clover, even though it flowers, we tapped the flowers looking for this particular insect, and we really didn't find it in that. So we're going to try crimson clover in between the rows. And crimson clover stays fairly short. We think it isn't really a high maintenance type living mulch. So we're going to try that this year in some demonstration trials.
Okay, Matt would, as a follow-up to that, like to clarify, he's talking about organic mulches not in the strawberry beds, but where you were growing the living mulch.
Okay, I'm sure with, like you said, leaves, wood chips, or whatever else would be very beneficial, I think any of those would be okay to use in between the rows.
Okay, perfect. Someone else would like to know whether most of the same systems would work for June bearing systems as well, as in using the white black plastic, low tunnels, etc., for the June bearers.
No, it would not, because with June bearers, you have runners that you want a number of runners for productivity, and those runners have to root in soil to produce daughter plants that will produce fruit buds going into the fall. So this type of system would not work well for June bearing strawberries.
Can I add to that answer, Steve?
Yes.
I agree with what you said, and I just want to add also that there's a farmer I was working with who last year did try to plant June bearing strawberries in plastic, and it absolutely 100% won't work. Not only because of what Steve said, but also because of not only do they need to reproduce and put out new plants, but those plants that are there originally will stop producing berries after a year or so. So that farmer that put in the plastic, I had to ask them to rip it out and replace it with straw. So that is a detrimental mistake. Please don't try that.
Yep, I believe it. Yes.
Okay, Aaron would like to know, what are you using to spray for tarnished plant bug?
We switch off. We do spray every week for tarnished plant bug. It's always there. And we do use an integrated pest management method of tapping flowers to know if we can avoid sprays, but it's almost inevitable that we have to spray on a weekly basis. So my other staff normally does this, and these names are coming. I mean, you can use one common insecticide is malathion, but malathion has, I believe, a 3-day reentry interval. So that might not work well with day neutral strawberries, but we use some of the insecticidal soaps we use, which seems to work good. You have to get adequate coverage. And there are the pyganics, and now it's starting to come to me, pyganics, which is an organic type insecticide. We use that quite a bit. And And some of these too are good with spotted wing Drosophila. But in our plots in St. Paul over the years, we just really haven't had an issue with spotted wing Drosophila. But we are spraying on almost a weekly basis for tarnished plant bug, and we're using insecticides that, would also, take care of some of the SWDs. But never have we seen any, fruit damage from SWD in our plots.
Steve, do you know of any organic insecticide that's effective on tarnished plant bug? I know you mentioned Pyganic. Does it work very well for that?
I think it does, but I can't swear by it.
Okay.
What is, oh gosh, it's at the tip of my tongue, Annie. It's used for spotted wing Drosophila in raspberries.
Entrust?
Yes, Entrust. There we go. Sorry. Yes. And we do use Entrust, also. So.
Do we have any more questions? Oh, sorry, Annie.
Go ahead.
Well, we don't have any more questions in the chat or the Q&A, so I'll give you guys a couple more minutes if anyone has something that they can think of.
Steve, this is Amaya. I want to ask you some questions about the fertilization plant that you use for the day neutral. How often do you fertilize them? Is there a higher need for fertilizer, either nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or any of the micronutrients early on in the season, or as you start harvesting, you provide them with more nutrients?
Yes, we use an organic fertilizer. It's a fish emulsion. Again, one of my other staff members applies this. I think it's called E-Fish. It has another name for it. And we inject it into our drip tape. And there are a number of those out there. And some of these fertilizers that you inject into your drip tape can plug up your drip tape. But this E-Fish, works quite well. I think it's 4-5-5. And again, we usually apply that every other watering. And so it's low in NP and K, but it is beneficial to the plants. Again, strawberries need a little bit more nitrogen, but for the most part, that has been very beneficial in producing great plants and fruit.
We have one more question that just came into the Q&A. Aaron would like to know, has the low tunnel system eliminated the use of most fungicides?
Almost absolutely. I can't remember the last time we used a fungicide. No, I mean, you might, the leaf spot in diseases and whatnot that are prevalent in strawberries with these low tunnels, and with the landscape fabric or any type of other living mulch, you avoid that splashing of rainwater on the soil, which can transfer those spores to the leaves of the strawberries. As you can see in this, for the most part, we don't get that disease. Portola tends to be a little bit more susceptible to the leaf spot and leaf scorch, but I can't remember the last time we've used a fungicide on these day neutral strawberries. It's been years.
All right, if we don't have any more questions, Annie, do you want to start wrapping up?
Sure. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. All the questions were so great today. And I think it feels really rewarding to have such an active discussion during a talk. So thank you to all of you. And thank you to Steve and Kate and Amaya for helping me coordinate this. And yeah, so that's it for today. Our contact info is here, and you're welcome to contact any of us with more questions. Other than that, have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, it's almost